You ever have that moment when the ordinary world tilts? Just enough that ordinary things suddenly feel dangerous? That morning started like any other, coffee brewing at 5:30, the thin cold bite of Colorado air under my boots, the familiar creak of the back door as I checked the tomato plants with my father. I'm Colonel Ethan Cross. 3 months earlier, I thought my biggest problem was keeping 12,000 soldiers in one piece. At Fort Valor, I was wrong. The real war came home in the shape of a perfectly coiffed woman with a spreadsheet and a grudge. Lena's my wife and was deployed to Germany. She's Captain Lena Cross, and she's excellent at the thing she does, which is why I expected the house to feel a little emptier while she was gone. Our twins, Jonah and Ellie, 10 years old and still convinced. Their dad's combat boots are made for stomp jumping, hung around the porch like two little flags of normalcy. My father, Robert, 73 and knotted with decades of stories and an old purple heart, tended tomatoes the way some men polished metals with reverence and muscle memory. Those hands used to strip an M16 in the dark. Now they prune stems at dawn, and sometimes, only sometimes, his eyes would clear and he'd look at me like the boy he used to know. Those were the mornings that made everything bearable. Then Marjorie Langston moved in across the street. You meet a new neighbor and you try to be neighborly. A wave, a casserole, trimming hedges to the right height. Marjorie arrived in a white BMW that seemed engineered to intimidate the rest of Maplewood. Her lawn looked like a miracle in miniature and her smile fit beneath an expensive manicure like a mask. She made it clear from day one that military families were a problem. Transient people, she said at the welcome meeting, that phrase like a scalpel. They lower property values. She said it with the certainty of someone who'd already written a speech and had a list of allies ready to sign it. That was her real gift, preparation. She was never surprised. She had a posture for outrage, a half-pleading look for friends, and a phone in a steady hand. The first run-in felt small, a pinprick. I'd parked my F-150 in my driveway, angled to leave room for the twins' bikes, when Marjorie stormed across the street with her phone out, snapping pictures like evidence. This is a residential neighborhood. Colonel, she announced as if she'd discovered a crime scene. Her voice carried that manufactured authority people put on when they expect applause. I told her calmly, "This is my property." She didn't argue the law. She activated a phone call. "We're reporting intimidating behavior," she announced into the line. An officer came. Officer Martinez, a good man who'd attended community liaison meetings with me, showed up and did his job. The embarrassed theater of politely serious questions while Marjorie nodded like a well-trained witness. The whole thing was ridiculous. But ridiculousness is a medicine that rarely cures a festering thing. It only disguises it. After that, little things started to stack. A notice about a military-style vehicle. A citation for excessive noise when I started the truck for PT at 0630. A fine for a fence board I'd fixed because it was falling off and was a safety hazard. Each piece of paper I received had the same careful typography, different clauses, cherry-picked from HOA bylaws that most of us don't read unless trouble comes knocking. At first I thought, annoying neighbor, overzealous HOA. Then patterns began to appear like fingerprints. The notices weren't random. They were surgical. They were aimed. When a neighbor with a school committee, Roll started whispering to other parents about military instability, keeping kids from holding school positions. The quiet bad faith felt less like a petty feud and more like an operation. Jonah came home from school one afternoon with a permission slip crumpled in his fist and eyes bright with tears. "Daddy, Mrs. Ellis said I might not be in the safety patrol anymore." Ellie, holding tight to the handlebars of a broken tricycle, told me other kids' parents said we were just passing through. My stomach did something new then. Tight, metallic. The house felt less like shelter and more like a target. And when my father looked up from his tomatoes and said, "That woman reminds me of the political officers in Saigon," I nearly laughed out loud and nearly screamed, the two reactions arriving at once, ridiculous and righteous. Even through the fog of his dementia, he'd seen the pattern. He'd always been good at spotting the person who wanted to own the room. I stopped treating the problem like a neighbor quarrel and began to gather evidence like a man who knew how to read a pattern. 23 years in military. Intelligence had taught me that the difference between random events and an operation is documentation. I checked HOA minutes, public records, citizen complaints. What I discovered in a single hour of digging made my skin prickle. Military families. We made up maybe a quarter of the neighborhood were receiving nearly 3/4 of the violations. Civilians got warnings. We got formal citations. Names kept repeating. Same handwriting across complaints. Same paragraphs of accusation. Different dates and different victims. Somebody had done their homework. Somebody was building a dossier. A jog one Saturday morning gave me the smoking gun I didn't want to find. Marjorie's fence had the same violation I was cited for, installed months earlier with no notice on her file. Her husband's diesel truck roared awake every day at 06:45, and no one called the police. That asymmetry is a language of its own. Targeted enforcement. By Sunday I had a manila folder that was becoming dense, a chronology of something ugly taking place under the polite surface of Maplewood. The folder smelled of fresh print and vindication. I laid the papers out on my dining table and realized this wasn't about parking or lawn height. This was a campaign, and campaigns need organizers. That night, after tucking Jonah and Ellie into bed with promises that weren't lies, "We're not going anywhere," I poured coffee strong enough to wake the dead and opened my laptop. If someone wanted to wage a quiet war against my family and others like us, they'd made the mistake of assuming there weren't people trained to watch patterns for a living. So I watched and documented and mapped connections like a man slowly assembling a map of an enemy's supply chain. The thing about trained eyes is they don't turn off after you hang up your uniform. They look for patterns in neighborhood bylaws, the same way they used to look for patterns in jihadist communications. And when patterns form, you stop asking for reconciliation. You start planning a response. By the time the first part of the map filled in names, dates, victims, I knew this would not be a small fight. It would be the kind of fight that takes patience, paperwork, and the stubborn refusal to accept that a few well-dressed people can rewrite a community's rules overnight. I poured another cup of coffee and went back to the papers. The kids were asleep. My father hummed in another room. The neighborhood lights blinked on like stars, trying very hard to be ordinary. But inside my house, the ordinary had been compromised. And the thing you learn in uniform is that when the ordinary is compromised, you respond systematically. That's what I began to do. When something is meant to look accidental, it rarely is. Over the next few weeks, the little slights turned into a rhythm, a beat that, when listened to closely, revealed choreography. I thought the worst was petty HOA nonsense. I was wrong. It was a campaign, and campaigns don't stumble into place. They're assembled, rehearsed, and launched. It started where kids live most of their lives, school. Jonah and Ellie had always loved school. Jonah loved the soccer field like it was a second home. Ellie had a knack for organizing things and took pride in the safety patrol. Badge she wore with solemn dignity. Both of them carried the quiet confidence of kids who believed their parents taught them the right things: honesty, respect, and hard work. But when the first notice came about, concerns for military, family stability affecting leadership roles, it landed like a stone. They told me their teacher had been awkward and the principal said there were community concerns. My stomach flipped. The language was soft but lethal. It sowed doubt into the fabric of how administrators saw military kids. I started knocking on doors, not because I wanted to fight everyone, but because pattern recognition works better with more eyes. The knock and talk revealed what I'd suspected. Identical complaints filed across 3 subdivisions, same phrasing, same signatories popping up in HOA minutes, the same names resurfacing in parent emails. It wasn't just Marjorie. She was the front. Sure, the voice that called the shots, but the orchestra had violins and percussion. The more I dug, the clearer the network became. It spanned school committees, HOA boards, even a few city planning pockets that could make noise when called upon. The list of affected families grew fast, 12 in total, scattered across Maplewood, Pineview, and Cedar Ridge. That number was small for a battalion, but it was large for a neighborhood. I set up meetings, informal at first, then formal as the evidence stack increased. We'd sit around a kitchen table with coffee cooling and share what had happened. The citations, the parent emails, the witnesses who suddenly remembered seeing something suspicious. The day a military dad parked his truck a certain way. Each story was a thread, and as the threads went into the map, the weave became undeniable. Someone was coordinating. Someone was keeping notes. Someone had built a spreadsheet with deployment, schedules and flags for which family might be pushed out easiest. That last detail felt like a vice. Who does a spreadsheet like that unless they want to use it? Word spreads fast in military communities. It spreads by design. We depend on networks when we PCS, when we lose a loved one, when we need a babysitter at the last minute. I called friends, enlisted league contacts, and before long, I had a team of people who'd seen the same thing. Captain Alvarez 2 cul-de-sacs over with a stack of HOA notices. A sergeant whose son couldn't try out for the band because stability concerns were raised. A lieutenant whose home improvements were suddenly flagged for permitting errors. Each case alone looked like bureaucratic overreach. Together, they looked like a targeted operation. But evidence is only as good as how you document it. I had the training to make the documentation count. If you want to turn neighborhood noise into a federal case, you have to make it neat, chronological, and easy to understand. So I did what I always did in intelligence. I organized photographs, time-stamped recordings, school emails, tour minutes, witness statements, a pattern analysis that showed not just coincidence, but correlation, violations spiking around, certain base events, similar language across unrelated filings, and a concentration of complaints targeting military families disproportionately. When you put numbers next to injustice, it becomes harder to dismiss. Numbers don't have the luxury of being offended. They're blunt instruments. At the same time, small cruelties ramped up. At a PTA meeting, Marjorie and her associates presented a slick, color-printed concern report about military family. Mobility and the supposed negative effects on student leadership. Her slides had cherry-picked statistics and a tone so professional it would have made a campaign manager smile. She called it community safety. What it was, in plain terms, was a pitch to normalize exclusion. Parents nodded politely. People are susceptible to a reasonable voice wrapped in data. It looks like wisdom. The problem with wisdom packaged this way is it's often designed to sound like the only obvious choice. Our side needed to respond like professionals, calm, factual, and relentless. I reached out to a local, civilian attorney who'd worked with military families before and explained what I'd compiled. He listened, eyebrows furrowing, then asked the question any good lawyer would. Do you want to pursue an administrative fix or build a case for enforcement under federal protections? My answer was simple, both. We began a 2-track approach. One track, civil remedies through HOA and school district procedures. The other, document everything in a way that would trigger the kind of protection statutes meant to protect service, members and their families. Law is slow and methodical, a lot like military planning. But what law lacks in speed, it more than makes up for in finality when you get it right. As I built the case, I realized there were human costs that numbers couldn't fully reflect. Families were frightened. Spouses weren't sleeping. A particularly sharp moment came when a neighbor, a recently retired master sergeant named Lewis, told me his wife had gotten into an argument at work and her supervisor had implied their family might be too unpredictable to consider for a long-term position. That comment translated into lost income. Another family pulled their kid from a program out of fear of being targeted further. The spreadsheet of damages I started to assemble wasn't just numbers. On a page, it represented missed opportunities, sleepless nights, small deaths of dignity. That's the thing about targeted harassment. It eats away at life in tiny increments until people get tired and leave. We started holding regular meetings, military families, sympathetic civilians, a few legal advisors, and a counselor who specialized in trauma from targeted harassment. We needed to be prepared not just legally, but emotionally. Harassment wears people down. It's designed to create exhaustion and isolation. Our group became a mutual aid cell, childcare swaps, documentation clinics, and a rotating chain of who'd attend. School board meetings, so a military face would be present. Calm and articulate, solidarity changes the math. When you're no longer isolated, the campaign loses power. One night, after a long meeting that felt like triage, I took the files to base security. You can present evidence to civilian authorities, but sometimes civilian authorities are part of the problem. And that's when you need to involve the institutions that protect service members. They took my documents seriously in a way that was reassuring and sober. There was a conversation about thresholds, about what constitutes interference with military families, and about how data that points to organized intelligence gathering crosses into territory that requires higher-level investigation. That was a line I hadn't expected to cross. We were still a neighborhood fight in my mind. Turns out the evidence suggested professional-level reconnaissance had been done on our families. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. So the game changed. We were no longer just defending property or reputations. The implications were bigger, national security adjacent and ugly, and as the tension ratcheted up, so did the need for precision. If we were going to prevail, we'd have to be lawful, careful, and tenacious. Emotion would be a weapon if unfocused, but a steady, documented resolve could turn this harassment campaign into a legal reversal that would protect not just my family but others like us. The choice was clear: escalate the documentation and coordination, or let a lot of families lose in small, permanent ways. I picked the former. You know that point where irritation turns into absolute clarity? That moment when you stop wondering why something is happening and start preparing to end it? That was me, sitting at my desk at 2 km, surrounded by paper, screens glowing like quiet battle maps. The smell of burnt coffee thick in the air. I wasn't just a neighbor dealing with a pushy HOA anymore. I was an officer documenting a coordinated attack on military families, and the more I dug, the darker it got. It started with a phone call that made my jaw tighten before the first sentence finished. "Colonel Cross," the voice on the other end said, "we've received several complaints regarding your conduct in the community." It was Lieutenant Colonel Ava Quinn from Base Security. She's tough, fair, and not someone who entertains nonsense. Her tone was cautious. The kind people use when they're following protocol but already suspect the report's garbage. Apparently someone had accused me of using intimidation tactics and showing signs of mental instability. The report even suggested that I was using military authority to threaten civilians. I didn't need a name. There was only one person in Maplewood who'd use that language: Marjorie Langston. That was her next move: weaponizing bureaucracy. Filing false police reports wasn't enough anymore. She'd gone after my military record. That's a whole new battlefield. See, in the civilian world, you can gossip and spread rumors. In the military, a single accusation, even false, can wreck your career. It's the kind of thing you can't fully shake, no matter how clean your record is. I called Ava back the next morning. "Ma'am, if you're investigating me, I want to make sure you have everything you need," I said calmly. She sighed. "Ethan, I've already looked at the details. We're treating it as a routine check, but it's serious enough that someone wants it on record," I finished for her. "Exactly," she replied. "Document everything. We'll handle our side." That was all I needed to hear. I wasn't just defending my driveway anymore. I was defending my career, my reputation, and by extension, every service member who called Maplewood home. I started running cross-checks on complaint dates, who filed them, and when they were amplified online or by phone. Within a few hours, a pattern emerged so clean it could have been drawn with a compass. Marjorie's complaints always spiked right after HOA or city contract decisions that didn't go her way. I found out through public records that her husband, Raymond Langston, had recently lost a lucrative city maintenance contract worth $2.3 million. Guess who got the contract instead? A veteran-owned company. And guess who she started targeting immediately after that announcement? Military families. This wasn't just hatred or bias. It was revenge dressed up as civic concern. The next few days blurred into a montage of tension. Unmarked cars parked too long on my street, HOA letters arriving at impossible speed, my kids coming home with new rumors whispered about their dad. One night, Ellie climbed into my lap while I was typing reports. "Daddy, Mrs. Langston told the teacher that you scare people," she whispered. I looked at her, those wide brown eyes full of confusion and hurt. "Do I scare you?" I asked softly. She shook her head instantly. "You're just loud when you tell stories." That hit me harder than I expected, because she was right. I was trained to project authority. But to someone who's never stood at attention or been yelled at by a drill sergeant, that same tone can sound intimidating. Marjorie had found a way to twist what I am into something ugly. The breaking point came one crisp Friday morning. I was backing out of my driveway, late for a base meeting, when I saw her, standing there, phone in hand, right behind my truck. She was filming. As I shifted into reverse, she started shouting, "He's trying to run me over! He's dangerous! Send the police!" I slammed the brakes, threw it into park, and stared at her through the rear camera feed, and that's when I caught it. Audio from her phone, picked up clearly by my truck's exterior mic. Her voice, calm and low before she started acting. "This should be the final complaint we need. Once they remove him from command, the rest will leave too." That was it. the smoking gun. I let the scene play out. 2 patrol cars showed up. The officers were cautious, but professional. Officer Martinez looked at me with an expression halfway between apology and disbelief. "Colonel, I'm sorry, but we have to take a statement again." I nodded. "You're just doing your job." Marjorie stood off to the side, fake tears streaming, phone still recording. I told the officers calmly, "My home security system and my truck both record video and audio. You're welcome to review the footage." That changed their posture instantly. Within 20 minutes, the story flipped. They saw her standing there before I even entered the truck. They heard her say the words, "The victim had just confessed to orchestrating false complaints." Martinez's report was meticulous. He's a good cop. But even as they left, I knew this wasn't over. Marjorie was desperate now, and desperate people are dangerous. That night, I played the recording over and over, analyzing every inflection. There was something else, a faint second voice. She wasn't talking to herself. Someone else was on that call. I enhanced the audio with software from my old intelligence toolkit. The second voice was male, calm, professional. He said, "Make sure this one sticks. It'll put pressure on command." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just her vendetta. She was working with others, possibly people with access to inside information about base personnel. This was organized, and if it was organized, it could be dismantled. The next morning, I took the evidence to Lieutenant Colonel Quinn. Her eyes widened as she watched the clip. "Ethan, this is no longer a harassment case," she said flatly. "This is federal. We coordinated with the JAG office and began preliminary paperwork under the Military Family Protection Act, a federal statute most civilians don't even know exists. It allows commanders to investigate and act when civilians interfere with service members' family security. I filed an official report, 68 pages, detailed, time-stamped with attachments. Every false report, every HOA violation, every school complaint. It wasn't anger on paper. It was precision. By Sunday, things were in motion. Base security quietly began monitoring communications tied to the harassment network. What they uncovered shocked even me. 3 other neighborhoods, Pineview, Cedar Ridge, and Silver Oaks, had identical complaint patterns. "Military families targeted," same phrasing, same concerned citizen group signatures, and the coordinating email address? Marjorie Langston, communityfocus.org. She wasn't just running a neighborhood campaign. She was part of a regional network actively tracking military families across multiple counties. The pattern matched something chillingly familiar from my intelligence days. Civilian data collection designed to isolate and apply pressure through psychological and social means. They weren't just trying to annoy us. They were trying to drive us out. That night, sitting on my back deck under the fading glow of the porch light, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and purpose. For months, I'd been reacting, defending, explaining, documenting. But now I had direction. Marjorie had crossed the line from nuisance to threat. And when someone targets your family, or any military family, that's not just harassment anymore. That's a mission. I took one last sip of cold coffee, stared at the dark silhouette of her perfect lawn across the street, and whispered to myself, "You picked the wrong soldier, Marjorie. There's a specific kind of calm that comes before decisive action. Not peace, not relief, but the silence a soldier feels when all variables are known, and the mission becomes inevitable." That's where I was. The evidence wasn't just pointing toward harassment anymore. It screamed conspiracy. The Sunday after the fake car attack incident, I sat in my home office with the blinds half drawn. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Christmas lights twinkled on houses. Kids tossed footballs in driveways. And Marjorie Langston's BMW gleamed in her perfectly manicured driveway like a polished trophy. But beneath that postcard calm, something rotten pulsed through Maplewood's heart. I started labeling files the way we used to during intelligence ops. Names, timestamps, behavioral patterns, cross-references. Every complaint, every notice, every coincidental HOA meeting topic. I color-coded them. Blue for military families. Red for civilians aligned with Marjorie's faction. Yellow for unknowns. After 4 hours, the map looked like a battle diagram. A web of influence, manipulation, and deceit. The deeper I went, the more names popped up. Barbara Ellis from the school board, the one who removed. Jonah from Safety Patrol was in the same parent group Marjorie chaired. A city planner named Greg Halpin had quietly rewritten a noise. ordinance that made early morning vehicle warm-ups a punishable offense, and Margaret Dorsey, the HOA vice president, had conveniently acquired property value data to support selective enforcement. Individually, they were nothing. Together, they were coordinated precision. By Monday morning, I briefed Lieutenant Colonel Ava Quinn on what I'd discovered. She was no stranger to complex operations, but when she saw my wall of evidence, color-coded, cross-labeled and connected, even she took a step back. "Ethan," she said quietly, "this looks like a counterintelligence report." "That's because it is," I replied. "They're conducting what's basically civilian psyops on military families. They're tracking us, isolating us, and pushing us out of our homes under the guise of community regulation." Ava exhaled. "We can't treat this as small-town harassment anymore." We agreed to initiate a joint investigation between base legal and the FBI's Domestic Security Division under the Military Family Protection Act. That law, barely known to most people, gives federal protection to service members and their families against organized discrimination and targeted harassment. It wasn't written for parking disputes. It was written for moments exactly like this. That same afternoon, I reached out to the other affected families. We met at Master Sergeant Lewis's house. 12 people in one living room. Tired, angry, but determined. "We have evidence," I told them. "Hard evidence. The audio from my truck, the coordinated timing, the false reports, even documents showing they've been sharing information about our families." Captain Alvarez slammed his coffee mug down. "They've been watching our kids," he said through clenched teeth. "Yes," I replied, my voice low. "And they've been collecting data about deployment schedules and security routines. This isn't harassment anymore. It's intelligence gathering." The room went silent, the kind of silence that carries weight. "So what do we do now?" Sergeant Lewis asked finally. "We go by the book," I said. "We do what soldiers do best, but we plan, document, and execute." We called it Operation Neighborhood Justice. Tuesday. Morning felt different, focused, electric. I started assembling a command-style operation file. Objective: neutralize coordinated civilian harassment and restore lawful protections for military families. Assets: base legal, Major Stevens; FBI liaison, Agent Rachel Morrison; military family network, 12 confirmed families; local law enforcement contact, Officer Martinez; risks: media distortion, civilian backlash, escalation from Marjorie's faction. Timeline: 7 days to compile and deliver all evidence to federal authorities. Every mission needs a spark, a moment that shifts from defensive to offensive. For us, it came from Agent Morrison. She arrived at Fort Valor on Wednesday afternoon, calm, mid-40s, eyes sharp like someone who's seen enough liars to recognize one from a block away. She spent 3 hours reviewing my files in silence. Then she looked up and said, "Colonel, this is one of the cleanest civilian interference cases I've seen in a decade. You've got them dead to rights." Those words felt like oxygen. She leaned forward. "We're going to need you to lead coordination from the ground. We'll handle surveillance, legal groundwork, and warrant prep. You keep eyes on neighborhood movement." Translation: I was back in the field. This time, the battlefield was my cul-de-sac. Thursday morning brought new intel. One of our tech contacts, a Navy veteran turned cybersecurity analyst, traced email traffic from Marjorie's HOA group. What he found made my blood run cold. Their shared document wasn't just a complaint list. It was a database, color-coded, updated weekly, and containing sensitive details. Deployment and return dates, spouse employment information, children's school and extracurricular schedules, medical details and emergency contacts. "Who the hell would collect this?" I muttered. Someone feeding data to an external source," my analyst replied grimly. "This kind of structure? It's not amateur. The FBI confirmed it within 24 hours. Some of the data requests originated from IP addresses outside the country. This wasn't just about neighborhood pettiness anymore. It was potential espionage." Friday morning, the hammer dropped. Agent Morrison called me directly. "Colonel Cross, we've confirmed the network. Extends into 3 counties and involves at least 4 officials. You're authorized to initiate civilian intervention protocols under Section 1482, Title 18. That meant one thing: federal authority." I turned to Major Stevens in legal affairs. "Prepare summons drafts for Langston, Ellis, Halpern, and Dorsey. They'll appear voluntarily, or with federal escorts." Stevens grinned. "Sir, they're not going to see this coming. No, I said, sipping the bitter coffee that had fueled this war from day one. But they'll feel it. Saturday morning dawned gray and quiet. The calm before impact. I stood by my front window, watching Marjorie pacing her driveway on another phone call, voice sharp and animated. She didn't know it yet, but her network's communications were being recorded by federal surveillance. Her every word, every lie, every slander, all neatly catalogued and time-stamped. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because the next day, Sunday, 1400 hours, she'd be walking through the gates of Fort Valor under federal summons. And when she sat across from me, she'd be facing the full weight of the system she tried to manipulate. I looked out across the neighborhood, at the flags waving in front yards, the swing sets, the mailboxes lined up in perfect symmetry, and thought, you wanted to make this a battlefield, Marjorie. So let's see how you handle an opponent who doesn't lose. There's a certain smell in every command office, printer ink, burnt coffee, and the faint tang of metal from the paper clips that hold your career together. That's what filled the air the day everything came full circle. The day Marjorie Langston walked into Fort Valor to face the consequences of her suburban war. The clock hit 13:59. Outside my office, the flag whipped in the winter wind like a reminder that order still mattered, that truth still had a chain of command. At exactly 14 hours, she arrived. I watched from the window as her white BMW rolled up to the base gate like it was entering a crime scene, which, technically, it was. 2 base security vehicles flanked her. She looked smaller than usual, her perfect posture cracked by nerves she couldn't quite hide. Her sunglasses couldn't mask the anxiety in her shoulders. When she stepped inside the command building, she clutched her handbag like a lifeline. But the thing about lifelines? They don't work when the ocean you're drowning in is of your own making. "Mrs. Langston," I greeted, voice calm and clipped. "Thank you for appearing voluntarily." Her eyes darted around the room, toward the wall of evidence charts, the 2 people seated behind me, and the stack of files thicker than any HOA manual she'd ever weaponized. To my right sat Major Patricia Stevens, legal counsel. To my left, Agent Rachel Morrison from the FBI, posture straight, expression unreadable. Every movement in that room was deliberate. Every silence was tactical. Marjorie tried to speak first. "I demand to know why I'm being treated like some kind of criminal. This is a civilian matter. You have no right—" Agent Morrison cut her off, voice cool as polished glass. "Mrs. Langston, you are here because our joint federal investigation has documented multiple violations of the Military Family Protection Act, as well as potential civil rights crimes. You are not under arrest yet, but this is an official interview and you will answer truthfully." That "yet" hit her harder than any yell could have. Her chin trembled. "This is absurd. I've only ever tried to make our neighborhood safe." I leaned forward. "Safe from what exactly?" She blinked, mouth opening and closing. "From veterans?" I continued quietly. "From military? Families who've spent years defending the same flag flying outside this building?" Her confidence cracked. For the first time since I'd met her, the mask slipped. I turned on the screen behind me. It displayed a single video file, time-stamped, clear audio, perfect HD. It was the footage from my driveway, the one where she'd accused me of trying to run her over. We watched her approach my truck, phone in hand, fake fear in her voice as she shouted for help. Then her calm prelude played back through the speakers. "This should be the final complaint we need. Once they remove him from command, the rest will leave too." The color drained from her face. "Would you like to explain that statement?" I asked. Her lips trembled. "That's—" Taken out of context, Major Stevens interjected, "Context doesn't change intent. Mrs. Langston, you filed 3 false police reports in 10 days. You coordinated over 30 HOA citations. You led school meetings that promoted exclusion of military children. And you've been recorded admitting your goal was to drive them out of the neighborhood." Marjorie swallowed hard. Her eyes darted toward the door. For a second I could almost see her calculating escape routes, the way people do when denial begins to crumble under truth. Agent Morrison switched to the next slide, a screenshot of the Community Focus Network shared document. The headers read like something out of a spy manual. Family status, deployment date, spouse, job, children, school, risk level. Under my name. Cross Ethan, active command, high influence, target priority 1. When that line appeared, the room fell silent. Even Stevens's pen froze mid-note. Marjorie's voice cracked. I didn't make that list. Agent Morrison's voice never rose. You didn't make it, no, but you updated it. Do you recognize your email address in the metadata? Her eyes dropped to the table. Yes, Morrison continued. We also traced 2 IP addresses associated with that. Document to servers registered outside the U.S. You may not have realized it, but someone was using you. Mrs. Langston, you were part of an information-gathering network, targeting military personnel. The shock on her face wasn't entirely fake. You could see the realization sink in, that this little neighborhood crusade had been manipulated by people with motives far bigger and darker than HOA control. Still, I didn't feel pity, because intentions don't erase damage. I stood, walked to the evidence wall, and pointed to a section labeled Human Impact. Photos of families filled the board. Sergeant Lewis's son, Captain Alvarez's wife, my twins Jonah and Ellie, smiling in their school photos before the bullying began. These are the people you hurt, I said quietly. You filed papers. They lost opportunities. You called police. Their kids cried themselves to sleep. You told the school board military families were unstable. You turned neighbors into suspects. Her voice shrank. I didn't mean for any of this. That's the thing about warfare, Mrs. Langston, I interrupted softly. Collateral damage doesn't care about intent. Agent Morrison finished the questioning with surgical precision. She walked Marjorie through timelines, communications, and financial records. It took less than an hour to dismantle the illusion of innocence she'd built over months. At the end, Morrison pressed play on one last clip, footage from the press conference Marjorie had organized in front of my house. We demand the creation of military-free zones in civilian neighborhoods, Marjorie's voice echoed from the speakers, her hand raised to the crowd. That single sentence, broadcasted live, was the nail in her coffin. It wasn't harassment anymore. It was discrimination, clear, public, undeniable. I turned off the screen. That statement alone violates federal fare. Housing laws protecting veterans and service members, I said. You didn't just cross the line. You built a picket fence on top of it. For the next 10 minutes, no one spoke. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence. Finally, Agent Morrison said, Mrs. Langston, based on this evidence, you are facing multiple federal charges: conspiracy, harassment, civil rights violations, and possible national security interference. Marjorie's voice came out small. Can I cooperate? Morrison nodded once. If you provide full disclosure about the other participants and foreign contacts, we'll recommend leniency. That's when she broke. Through tears and shaking hands, she gave them everything: names, emails, the structure of the concerned residents, alliance, and how certain city officials fed her. Classified housing data. She talked for 2 hours straight. Every word became another nail in her own network's coffin. When it was done, she slumped back in the chair, drained, defeated, and stripped of her suburban armor. I looked at her one last time and said, You called the police on me for parking in my own driveway. You tried to take my job, my home, my peace. Now you'll have to explain to a federal judge why you thought veterans were the enemy. Her voice was barely a whisper. I just wanted control. I nodded slowly. And that's exactly what you lost. As she was escorted out, I looked again at the board filled with evidence, pictures, and timelines. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about proving that when you target military families, you don't just break laws. You challenge the backbone of the people who protect this nation. And that's a fight you'll never win. They say justice moves slowly, like a glacier grinding through mountains. But when the glacier finally cracks, it destroys everything in its path. That week, justice didn't walk. It marched. The morning after Marjorie Langston's interrogation, Fort Valor buzzed like a live wire. Base security, JAG officers, and federal agents swarmed conference rooms filled with printouts, evidence charts, and flashing monitors. You could practically feel the momentum, the kind of organized chaos that meant something big was coming. I walked into command at 0600 hours sharp, uniform pressed, coffee steaming in my hand. Major Stevens handed me a folder so thick it could have stopped a bullet. Here it is, sir, she said, sliding it across the desk. Federal arrest warrants. Langston, Ellis, Halpern, Dorsey, and 3 unnamed external contacts. External contacts? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She nodded grimly. Civilians with links to a foreign data brokerage network. The FBI believes they were paying for intelligence on military family vulnerabilities. The air in the room changed. You could feel it! That slow burn of realization when a neighborhood feud turns into a national security threat. By 0700, Agent Rachel Morrison briefed us in the command conference room. Her voice was steady, her words sharp. Operation Clean Sweep, she announced, clicking through slides on the projector. At 0900 hours, federal teams will move simultaneously on 6 properties. We'll seize devices, documents, and servers connected to the community-focused network. Colonel Cross, your role is to brief the affected families and maintain communication discipline. No leaks? I nodded. Copy that. Morrison glanced at me, expression softer than usual. Colonel, what you built here had the documentation, the evidence trail. It's airtight. You gave us everything we needed. I smiled slightly. Just doing my job, Agent. She smirked. Yeah, but you did it better than half my analysts. At exactly 0900, the operation began. Marjorie Street, my street, exploded into quiet precision. Black SUVs rolled up. Federal marshals in windbreakers exited in pairs, efficient, silent, unstoppable. The sound of boots on pavement echoed through, Maplewood like thunder muffled by control. Marjorie Langston stepped onto her porch in a robe, clutching a mug that said, HOA Queen. The irony hit like a punchline written by karma itself. By Thursday, restitution hearings began. Federal prosecutors filed claims totaling nearly $400,000 in damages, emotional, financial, and reputational. Marjorie's lawyer tried to argue community misunderstanding. The judge, unimpressed, shut him down after 10 minutes. This court recognizes the systematic discrimination against protected military families, the judge said sternly. The defendants didn't just harass, they conspired. Verdict, guilty on all major counts. Marjorie Langston, 18 months in federal custody. Barbara Ellis, 1 year and a permanent ban from public education roles. Greg Halpern, 2 years probation and dismissal from city employment. Margaret Dorsey at 9 months and loss of HOA privileges for life. When the gavel hit, the sound echoed like finality. The empire of petty tyranny had fallen. But even in victory, there's aftermath. For weeks, I'd wake up before dawn out of habit, listening for the crunch of gravel or the slam of a police door. But instead, I'd hear my twins laughing in the kitchen, or my father humming as he brewed coffee. The house, once a fortress under siege, had become a home again. One evening, as the sun dipped over the mountains, Ellie asked, "Daddy, is Mrs. Langston still mad at us?" I smiled gently. "No, sweetheart. She's learning what happens when people break rules that protect others." Jonah grinned. "So, you kinda arrested the HOA?" "Something like that," I chuckled. But really, we just reminded them who they were dealing with. A few weeks later, the Department of Defense launched a new initiative inspired by our case, the Military Family Resilience Program. It ensured that any harassment of service, families in civilian communities, would trigger automatic federal review. My inbox flooded with thank you messages from bases across the country. "You gave us courage," one wrote. Another said, "For the first time, someone proved we're not powerless." That meant more to me than any medal. On the surface, Maplewood returned to normal. Lawns trimmed, mailboxes straight, kids on bikes again. But under that normalcy was something new: respect. HOA meetings were now inclusive, transparent, and for the first time ever, featured 2 military family representatives. The new president, Master Sergeant Lewis's wife, and trust me, she ran it like a proper operation. As for me, I stayed at Fort Valor, promoted to oversee base community integration programs. My mission had shifted from combat to connection. Some nights I'd sit on the back porch with a cup of coffee, watch my dad's tomato plants sway in the wind, and think about how the smallest battles can define us more than the biggest wars. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration. Marjorie lost her title, her power, her freedom, but we gained something far greater: peace. And peace, my friend, is the hardest victory to win, but the sweetest one to keep. There's a strange silence that follows. Justice, not the loud kind that comes with applause or headlines, but the deep, steady quiet that fills a space once occupied by chaos. That's the silence that settled over Maplewood. In the months after Operation Clean Sweep, and for the first time in what felt like forever, that silence felt good. It's funny how normalcy hits you after the storm. You notice things you hadn't noticed in months. The laughter of kids on the street, the smell of barbecue from next door, the hum of a lawnmower instead of the hum of anxiety. The air didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like home. My father, Robert, had taken to sitting on the porch again, humming old war songs and pruning his tomato vines with the same careful precision he'd once used to clean his rifle. Every snip of the scissors sounded like closure. Sometimes he'd forget the details of who Marjorie Langston was, or why the neighborhood had become tense, but he always remembered the lesson. He'd look up and say, "You stood your ground, son. That's what matters." And for a man whose memory was slipping away piece by piece, those words meant everything. The twins, Jonah and Ellie, adjusted faster than anyone. Kids are resilient. They bounce back like the world never tried to break them. Ellie was back on safety patrol, proudly wearing her badge again. Jonah joined student council and even gave a speech titled, "Standing Up for What's Right." When I watched him on that stage, nervous but steady, I realized something that caught me off guard. This whole nightmare had turned into a masterclass for my children. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in integrity. They learned that doing the right thing doesn't always mean being liked. It means being unbreakable in the face of injustice. One weekend, we were invited to the newly renamed Military Family Unity Festival, held right there at Fort Valor. What started as a small appreciation event had become a full-blown community celebration. A bridge between civilians and service members. There were food stalls, laughter, and kids running around with American flags painted on their faces. The mayor gave a speech, acknowledging the incredible courage of the cross, family and their neighbors. When he handed me the microphone, I wasn't sure what to say at first. But then I just spoke from the heart. "You don't serve your country for applause," I said. "You serve because you believe in something bigger than yourself. Honor, unity, and peace. But peace doesn't defend itself. Sometimes it takes standing up to the people who think rules don't apply to them. We're not looking for special treatment, just fairness. And when fairness returns, peace follows." The crowd went quiet, and then they stood, clapping, cheering, some even crying. I didn't expect it, but it hit deep, because for the first time, we weren't being looked at as the military families. We were being seen as neighbors. In the weeks that followed, the federal case against the Community Focus Network rippled through every level of government. New laws were drafted to expand the Military Family Protection Act, ensuring that what happened in Maplewood would never happen again. Agent Rachel Morrison called me one evening to say thank you. "You know, Colonel," she said with that dry humor of hers, "you just made my career a lot busier. Every HOA in America is about to get a memo." I laughed. "Good. Maybe now they'll think twice before targeting someone who served." She chuckled. "No kidding. And by the way, you've got a fan club at the Bureau. Half the analysts call you the HOA Terminator." I groaned. "Please tell me that's not going on a plaque somewhere." She paused. "Oh, it already is." As for Marjorie, the HOA queen herself, she eventually took a plea deal. 18 months in federal custody, 5 years probation, and permanent disqualification from any community leadership role. The news barely covered her sentencing, but that was poetic in itself. She wanted fame, control, validation, wherein she ended up erased from the very world she tried to dominate. The neighborhood she once ruled now thrived without her. Greener, friendlier, freer. There's a moral buried somewhere in that. Maybe karma doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just signs the paperwork quietly and lets justice do the talking. Months later, on a calm Sunday morning, I sat outside with a fresh cup of coffee. The twins were inside playing a board game. My father was humming softly, and the sun cut gold lines across the fence I'd once been fined for repairing. I thought about all of it. The arrests, the nights of exhaustion, the fear, the fury, the final victory. And I realized something important. Every soldier fights two wars, the one on foreign soil, and the one that begins when they come home. But what I learned in Maplewood is this: we don't fight alone. We fight for our families, our communities, and for the quiet promise of a safe life we've earned. And sometimes, protecting that peace means standing tall against the people who think your discipline is intimidation and your service is a threat. They don't understand that strength isn't about control. It's about responsibility. That's what Marjorie never grasped. And that's what every military family already knows. So if you're listening to this and you faced something similar, harassment, discrimination, injustice, remember this. Document everything. Stay calm. And never ever underestimate your own resolve, because bullies thrive on chaos. But discipline? Discipline wins wars, even the quiet suburban ones. As the camera of life pulled back, my twins laughing, my dad tending tomatoes, the flag snapping in the Colorado breeze, I took a long sip of coffee and whispered to myself, mission accomplished. And that's how Maplewood went from a battlefield to a brotherhood. Because sometimes heroes don't wear capes or medals. Sometimes they just wear patience, and a uniform that says they've already faced worse and survived. And when a Karen thinks she can bring a soldier down over a parking space, well, that's how HOA legends are born.